The Harlem sun was just beginning to paint the city with its morning glow. People bustled, grabbing coffee, heading to work, chatting with neighbors. Harlem throbbed with life, a place where anything felt possible. At the heart of it all was Malik, a sharp-dressed man of 35, his confidence quiet but undeniable. He was a familiar face in the neighborhood, Harlem having shaped much of who he was. But this Tuesday was different. As Malik approached his car, a sleek black sedan by a brownstone, he noticed two police officers walking towards him, their expressions stern. He'd seen them patrol before, but today they were headed straight for him. "Excuse me, sir," one called out. Malik turned, the air already thick with tension. He saw the officer's badge, Officer Kirkland. The other, Mendoza, stood slightly behind, hand near his belt. Malik's voice remained steady. "Yes." Kirkland's eyes narrowed. "Can I see some ID?" Malik had been here before, stopped without cause, asked questions without answers. His father's lessons echoed in his mind: stay calm, be polite, never escalate. He took out his wallet. "May I ask why?" Kirkland's tone sharpened. "You match the description of someone we're looking for. Just show me your ID." Malik handed over his license. Kirkland examined it, a raised eyebrow his only acknowledgement before returning it, wordlessly. Then came the familiar question. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Kirkland's voice was accusatory, as if Malik didn't belong. "I live here," Malik replied calmly. "I'm heading to work." Kirkland exchanged a glance with Mendoza, who stepped forward slightly. Malik's heart quickened. This wasn't going to be easy. "Where are you coming from?" Kirkland pressed. "I had breakfast at the diner down the street," Malik said, trying to diffuse the tension. "Is there a problem, officer?" Mendoza's hand inched closer to his belt. "Just answer the questions." Malik took a deep breath, his father's words a mantra. "I'm a lawyer," he said, hoping it would end the encounter. "I have a meeting in about an hour, so if there's nothing else." Kirkland's smirk returned. "A lawyer, hey? That's interesting." Malik felt the air shift, the unease growing heavier. "Look, officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to get to work." Kirkland ignored him. "Mind if we take a look inside your car?" Malik's stomach clenched. He had nothing to hide, but he knew how easily things could escalate. "I'd prefer if you didn't," Malik said carefully. "I need to get going." Kirkland stepped closer, his hand brushing against his baton. "Step away from the car." Malik hesitated a moment too long. Without warning, Kirkland grabbed Malik's arm, twisting it behind his back. Pain shot through him, but Malik tried to keep his voice steady. "What are you doing?" Mendoza was on him instantly, forcing Malik to the ground, knee pressing into his back. "You're under arrest for resisting arrest." Kirkland's voice was cold, emotionless. Malik's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. He had done nothing. Yet, here he was, face down on the pavement, handcuffs digging into his wrists. A small crowd had gathered, watching in horror. A young woman across the street recorded everything on her phone. Malik saw her, a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. Maybe this would help. Maybe the footage would show the truth. But in that moment, as he was dragged to his feet and shoved into the back of a police car, Malik knew the fight was just beginning. The police station was cold, sterile, suffocating. Malik was led through booking, hands cuffed behind his back, his suit wrinkled from the struggle. He held his head high, refusing to break. "Name?" the officer behind the desk asked, not looking up. "Malik Edwards," Kirkland answered before Malik could. The officer typed it in, his eyes flicking over the screen, his frown deepening. Something wasn't right. But he said nothing, simply motioning towards the holding cell. Malik was fingerprinted, photographed, and led to a small, dingy cell. The door clanged shut, a finality that made his heart sink. He sat on the bench, staring at the chipped paint, trying to process it all. How could this happen? How could someone like him, who had worked so hard, end up here? Hours passed. The silence was broken only by the occasional footsteps of officers outside. Malik kept his composure, but his mind raced. What would happen next? Would anyone believe his side of the story? Later, the mood in the station began to shift. Kirkland was walking through the halls when a younger officer approached him. "Kirkland, you know who you just arrested, right?" Kirkland shrugged. "Just another guy causing trouble." The younger officer shook his head. "No, that guy, he's not just some guy. He's a civil rights attorney. One of the biggest in the city. I saw his name in the papers last week. He's been involved in some major cases." Kirkland stopped. "You're kidding." "I'm not. You better be careful. If word gets out you arrested him without cause, this could blow up in your face." Kirkland's smirk faltered. Doubt crept in. Had he made a mistake? He didn't want to admit it, but the seed of worry was planted. Outside, the crowd had grown. What started as a few onlookers had become something bigger. Word had spread through the neighborhood. Dozens stood outside, demanding answers, chanting Malik's name, holding signs, recording everything. Malik's mother, a fierce woman who had raised him to be strong, stood at the front, her face tight with anger, her voice unwavering. She knew her son didn't belong in that cell, and she wouldn't let it slide. The media had caught wind of it. Reporters began to gather. This was no longer local, it was a public scandal in the making. Inside, the officers felt the pressure. Lieutenant Ramirez, new to the precinct, watched from her office window. "This is going to get ugly," she muttered, pacing. She knew something was off the moment she heard Malik's name. They had to do something, and fast. After hours in the cell, Malik heard the door creak open. Lieutenant Ramirez stood there, her face unreadable. "Mr. Edwards," she said formally, "you're free to go." Malik stood slowly, his body stiff. He didn't speak as he followed her through the station, past officers who avoided his gaze. He felt their shame. At the front, he saw the crowd. They erupted in cheers. But Malik remained calm. He knew this wasn't over. Ramirez hesitated, then spoke quietly. "I'm sorry for what happened today. This shouldn't have happened." Malik met her eyes, his voice steady. "You're right. It shouldn't have." He walked out of the station into his mother's arms, into the embrace of his community. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Malik ignored them. The real battle was just beginning. The following days were a whirlwind of media attention, public outrage, and legal action. Malik's wrongful arrest became the headline of every major news outlet. The bystander footage went viral, sparking debates about racial profiling, police misconduct, and the justice system. Kirkland and Mendoza were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But for Malik, that wasn't enough. He filed a lawsuit, determined to hold them accountable. The city was divided. Some stood with the police, arguing they were just doing their jobs. Others saw Malik's arrest as another example of systemic racism. But Malik wasn't backing down. He had spent his career fighting for justice, and now it was his own fight. Months passed. The trial began. The courtroom was packed, the tension palpable. Malik sat at the front, his expression calm but focused. Kirkland and Mendoza testified, trying to justify their actions, but their defense crumbled under the weight of the evidence, the footage, the witness statements, the undeniable truth that Malik had done nothing wrong. When the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted. Malik had won. The department was held accountable. Kirkland and Mendoza were fired. But for Malik, the victory was bittersweet. He had won his case, but the fight for justice was far from over. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and supporters, Malik spoke with quiet strength. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about all of us. We deserve to be treated with dignity, with respect, and we won't stop until that happens." In the years that followed, Malik continued his work as a civil rights attorney, advocating for those who couldn't fight for themselves. His story had inspired others, sparking a movement that demanded change. The police department underwent reforms, and new officers were trained to approach their work with fairness and understanding. But Malik knew that real change took time. It wasn't enough to win one case or change one department. The fight was ongoing, and he was ready to lead the way. As he walked through Harlem, the streets he had grown up on, Malik felt a sense of purpose. He had faced injustice, but he had also found strength in the people who stood with him. And as long as they were united, they could create a world where everyone was treated with the respect they deserved. Malik smiled, continuing his walk, his mind already on the battles ahead. He was ready. It was late summer in New York, the kind of heat that clung to your skin. But the city was alive, and Malik, fresh off his legal victory, had never felt more empowered. His phone buzzed constantly with messages of support, interview requests, and new cases. The legal battle he'd won hadn't just been about him, it had been a pivotal moment for the city, a step toward accountability in a world that often resisted change. But Malik wasn't resting. He was meeting with community leaders, planning town hall events for police reform. His victory was the spark, but he knew the fire needed to be kept alive. One evening, he was at Sylvia's, the iconic soul food restaurant in Harlem, a place of comfort, where the food felt like home. He sat across from Emma Rodriguez, a community organizer instrumental in building momentum for his case. "We need to capitalize on this moment," Emma said, her voice urgent. "People are paying attention. The city is awake, but we can't let them fall back asleep." Malik nodded, sipping his iced tea. "I know, but I'm trying to figure out the best way forward. Legal battles are one thing, but we need structural change." Emma leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. "What about setting up a civilian review board? We've been pushing for it for years. Now's the time." Malik considered it. Civilian oversight of the police department wasn't a new idea, but after his case, it might actually have a chance. "You're right," he said slowly. "If we can get the community involved in overseeing how the police operate, that could be huge. But we'll need the city council behind us. That's why we need to pressure them now," Emma said firmly. "With everything in the media, they'll have no choice but to act." Malik agreed. He could envision it, a city where police were held accountable not just by their peers, but by the people they served. It was ambitious, but necessary. In the days that followed, Malik threw himself into the movement. He met with activists, lawyers, and even some politicians sympathetic to the cause. But not everyone was on board. He faced opposition from city officials, police unions, and those resistant to reform. One afternoon, walking through Central Park to clear his head, he received a call from an unexpected number. It was Lieutenant Ramirez. "Malik," her voice was cautious but genuine, "can we meet? There's something I think you should know." He hesitated. Ramirez had been the one to release him, and she seemed different from the other officers. But Malik wasn't sure if he could trust her. Still, his curiosity won. "Where?" he asked. "Union Square in an hour." "Neutral ground," she replied, as if reading his thoughts. Malik arrived at Union Square, the air buzzing with the usual city energy. Ramirez was already there, on a bench, no longer in uniform, looking less rigid, less tied to the system. "You didn't have to come," she began, gesturing to the space beside her, "but I'm glad you did." Malik sat down, cautious. "What's this about?" Ramirez glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Look, I know you've been fighting this fight for a long time, and what happened with Kirkland and Mendoza was wrong. There's no other way to put it. But the truth is, this goes deeper than just a couple of bad cops." Malik listened, his interest piqued. "What are you saying?" "There are officers, higher UPS, who are trying to sabotage the reform efforts. They're not just resisting change, they're actively working to prevent it. Some of them, they don't want the public to know how deep the corruption runs." Malik felt anger rising. "And you're telling me this now? Why?" "Because you suddenly grew a conscience." Ramirez winced. "I've been part of this system for a long time, Malik. I've seen how it works from the inside. But after what happened to you, after seeing the way the community came together, I couldn't stay silent anymore." Malik studied her, looking for dishonesty, but he saw only exhaustion, the weariness of someone carrying the weight of a broken system for too long. "I want to help," she said softly. "I can give you names, documents, things that prove what's really going on. But you have to be careful. If they find out I'm involved." Malik nodded slowly. He didn't fully trust her, but the information could be invaluable. "Okay," he said, "but if we're doing this, we do it right." Ramirez handed him a small folder, her hand shaking slightly. "This is just the beginning." Back at his office, Malik opened the folder. It contained internal emails, memos, meeting notes. As he read, the picture became clear. A faction within the police department was actively undermining reform, targeting activists, manipulating crime statistics, and covering up misconduct. It was worse than he imagined. Malik knew he couldn't do this alone. He contacted his legal team and a trusted journalist, Clara Nguyen, a fierce investigative reporter who had covered his case. Together, they began piecing together the evidence. "This is explosive," Clara said, her eyes wide. "We need to be strategic," Malik said firmly. "We can't just dump everything at once. We need to build momentum, get the public on our side." Clara nodded. "I'll start with a series of articles, expose the cover-ups first. Then we'll hit them with the corruption at the top." Over the next few weeks, Clara's articles surfaced, each detailing another layer of corruption, each revelation more damning. The city was in uproar. Protests grew, calls for reform became impossible to ignore. But with each new article, Malik knew they were closer to a dangerous line. The people in power wouldn't stand by while their empire crumbled. One evening, leaving his office late, Malik felt something was off. The streets were quiet, and he noticed a black SUV parked across the street. He'd seen it before, lurking in the background, but now it seemed to be watching him. As he reached for his car door, a figure stepped out of the shadows, a tall man in a dark suit, his face partly obscured. "Mr. Edwards," the man said, his voice smooth but cold, "we need to talk." Malik's hand tightened around his phone, ready to dial for help. "Who are you?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's not important. What is important is that you understand the game you're playing. You've made some very powerful people uncomfortable." Malik stood his ground, refusing to be intimidated. "If you're trying to scare me, it's not going to work." The man's smile faded. "This isn't a threat, Mr. Edwards. It's advice. Walk away while you still can." Malik's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady. "I'm not walking away from this. You can tell whoever sent you that." The man's eyes hardened. "That's unfortunate for you." He turned and walked back to the SUV, disappearing into the night. Malik stood there, his mind racing. He knew the risks, but this was bigger than him now. He had to see it through. The following weeks were tense. Malik increased his security, but the threats continued: anonymous calls, strange men outside his office, even a brick through his window with a message, "Back off." But Malik refused to be intimidated. The Civilian Review Board was gaining traction, and with Ramirez's documents, they were close to securing the city council's support. They were on the verge of something monumental. One afternoon, Malik received a call from Emma. "Malik, you need to see this." She sent him a video circulating online, men with obscured faces burning a stack of papers. The caption read, "This is what happens to those who betray their own." Malik's stomach turned. Someone had found out about Ramirez. He called her, but there was no answer. He eventually tracked her down at a motel on the edge of the city. She looked exhausted, pale, drawn. "They know," she said quietly. "They know I've been helping you." "We can protect you," Malik said, though he wasn't sure if they could. "You did the right thing." Ramirez shook her head, her eyes filled with regret. "I don't know if it's enough. They'll come for me, and if they don't, they'll come for you." Malik placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're not backing down. We're too close." The final piece came a week later. Clara had uncovered the names of the high-ranking officials behind the corruption, officers who quietly siphoning money, fabricating reports, and silencing dissent. It was all set to be published in the next morning's paper. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He knew the backlash would be severe, but it was too late to stop. At dawn, the city woke to the front-page headline, "Corruption at the highest level, the truth about the NYPD's dark side." The fallout was immediate. Officers were suspended, investigations launched, and Malik became a household name. More importantly, the Civilian Review Board was approved. The broken system was finally being held accountable. Months passed, and the city began to heal. The review board was operational, reforms were being implemented. Malik had become a symbol, though he didn't see himself that way. To him, he was just doing what needed to be done. But the fight wasn't over. On the 10th anniversary of his case, a statue was erected in Harlem, commemorating Malik's contributions. It depicted a man reaching out a hand to lift someone up. At the unveiling, Malik stood with his mother, Emma, Ramirez, and many others. Looking at the statue, he felt a deep fulfillment. This was his life's work. As the sun set, casting a golden glow, Malik turned to his mother and smiled. "We did it," he said. She smiled back, her eyes filled with pride. Yes, we did. And with that, Malik walked into the future, ready to continue the fight. Justice was a journey, and it was one he was willing to walk for as long as it took.